Hi everyone. Today we will discuss British colonialism, its economic policies and their impact. Actually, this is one of the very important core area which will be asked in our prelims and mains examination. Let us just analyze how the questions from this respective area asked in our previous year prelims examinations. 2015 UPSC asked a question related to the major economic critic or critics of British colonialism. Who were the major economic critics of British colonialism, British colonial economic policies? This was a question asked in 2015. Then 2012 UPSC asked Rio to Valley system, one of the exploitative land revenue policies of British Company or British East India Company, and this question was related to the provisions of Rio to Valley system. What were the basic provisions or features of Rio to Valley system? Then there was 2012 another question regarding the biggest contribution of Dadabhai Naoroji, one of the earlier nationalist leader of Indian freedom struggle, a moderate leader of Indian freedom struggle, and of course his biggest contribution was the exposure of economic exploitative policies of the British. So there was a question related to Dadabhai Naoroji and his economic criticism on colonial rule. Then this is 2012 a question related to Permanent Settlement Act. Of course this is another land revenue policy of the British, and it is related to the basic provisions or the basic features of Permanent Settlement Act, which was introduced in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa by Lord Cornwallis in 17. We will discuss. So this is again Permanent Settlement Act. Then 2011 again there was a question related to home charges, the basic constituents of home charges. We have seen there were different theories, different notions given to the draining of wealth from India to England, and here these home charges constitute one of the important factors of, or one of the important constituents of these draining of wealth from India to England. So it was about home charges, its basic constituents or basic elements of home charges. There was a question from these economic policies of British, it was asked in 2011. And in the mains examination in 2014 UPSC asked a question which was related to these facets of economic policies of British in India, various facets of economic policies related to these British during the rule in India. And of course if you checked the previous year questions right from 1885 to 2010, you could notice that the questions related to British economic policies, be it their land revenue policies, be it their commercialization of agriculture, be it their industrial policies, or be it drain theory, you could see that there were questions asked from the British economic policies from 1885 to 2010 at regular intervals. So of course this is one of the core areas we have to study for both our prelims and mains. Let us discuss one by one. Here the introduction of British colonialism. Let us say the victory of 1757, the victory of 1757 Plassey battle, the victory at 1764 Buxar battle almost laid the foundation for British colonialism in India. The victory they made in 1757 Plassey battle, the victory they made in 1764 Buxar battle ultimately designed the future fate of Indian economy. It was the foundation of the colonial economy for the next 2 centuries. Here colonialism established here, and the establishment of British colonialism in India also witnessed subordination of Indian socio-political economic interest to British interest. Indian socio-economic political interest got subordinated to British interest. Then British economic policies, whatever the British economic policies followed by British colonialism, simply protected, promoted the interest of the economic interest of Britain only, not Indian economic interests. Colonialism established here, and establishment of colonialism ultimately subordinated Indian socio-economic political interests to British interests, and of course the economic policies, land revenue policies followed by Britain simply promoted, protected those interests of their motherland, their home country, not Indian interests. Ultimately, India was made a slave economy to Britain. No interest, no economic interest of India was ever protected. Simply British introduced a lot of economic policies for the protection, promotion of their imperial policies, their imperial interest only. Now here, the self-sufficient village economy ultimately transformed into a market economy, or ultimately transformed into a slave economy. Now, this was the initial stage of British colonialism, or this was the initial stage of British colonialism and their impact on Indian economy. Now you see, let us discuss one by one how their land revenue policies impacted Indian traditional agriculture sector or Indian traditional so-called village industries or Indian economy. Let us discuss 3 land revenue policies initiated by British in India. Permanent settlement is also called a Zamindari settlement. Zamindari settlement, it was introduced in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa. Then there is another land revenue settlement which is called Riotuari settlement, which was introduced in Madras Presidency. Later it was introduced in Bombay also. Then it is Mahalwari settlement, which was introduced in northwestern provinces. Also it was introduced in some parts of Punjab. Again it was introduced in central India, upper Gangetic basins. In northwestern provinces, in certain portions of Punjab, in upper Gangetic valley, and in some portions of central India, Mahalwari settlement was introduced. These were the 3 major land revenue policies introduced by the British colonial rule or the British colonial government. Now, what were the features of permanent settlement? This is very important. UPSC regularly asks questions from these different land revenue policies of the British in our prelims examination. So, always have the core ideas related to permanent settlement, its features, its provisions, its merits, demerits. Now, permanent settlement means it is a land revenue contract. Basically, it is a land revenue contract between the company and the zamindar. This is basically a land revenue contract signed between the company and the zamindar. It was introduced in Bengal. It was introduced by Lord Cornwallis, and initially it was introduced in Bengal. Later it implemented in Bihar, Orissa also. And here the zamindar means the old rajas and talukdars. The old rajas and the talukdars in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, they were converted into owners of the land. As per this settlement, the rajas and talukdars are converted into owners of the land. Now, the ownership of the entire estate that goes to these rajas and talukdars, they are made the owners of the land, and they were responsible for collection of the revenue and payment of the revenue to the government or to the colonial government. And here the amount they were supposed to pay is fixed. I told you this is a land revenue policy signed between company and the zamindar, and here the zamindar is the old rajas and talukdars. The zamindars, they are made the owners of the land. Now they are the owners of the entire estate, and they have the responsibility to collect the revenue from the farmers and pay a fixed amount to government. And usually this fixed amount, fixed amount was set for a long term. That is why this is called a permanent settlement act, or it is a zamindari settlement. Here the fixed amount the zamindar supposed to pay to the colonial government, it is fixed or it is permanent for a long term. And usually this fixed amount was like 10 out of 11. It was like 10 out of 11. 10 out of 11 1 out of 11. You just to see, this is very important here. Here, if the total production is 11 units, out of 11, 10 must be paid to the colonial government and 1 can be kept with the zamindar. This is the permanent land revenue settlement. Total collection is, for example, it is 11 units. 11 units, out of 11 units, 10 units must be paid to the government, which is a fixed amount. 10 must be paid to the government and the remaining 1 can be kept with the zamindar. And one interesting thing is, if there is any surplus in this particular production, suppose in case of this 10, 11, if there is any surplus in the production, these surplus go to zamindar only, it goes to zamindar only. That means he is supposed to pay a fixed amount. He is supposed to pay a fixed amount to government. So, this is very important, this provision is very important here. Keep in mind, under this land revenue settlement, the zamindar or the owner of the estate, owner of the land is supposed to pay only a fixed amount to government. In case of any surplus in the production, in case of there is surplus in the production, that surplus goes to zamindar only and there is no need for giving the share of the surplus to government. Whatever the surplus in the production, that goes to the zamindar's treasury or that goes to zamindar only. And on the other side, if there is any reduction in the production, if the total produce is lesser than what is already signed or what is already agreed, in that case, if there is failure of crops, in that case that must be paid by or that must be borne by the zamindar himself. So, here the fact is very clear, this permanent settlement is fixed for or it is settled for a permanent amount or a fixed amount, and that fixed amount must be paid to the government. If there is any surplus in the production, that surplus goes to the zamindar, that means government cannot claim that surplus, and if there is any loss in the production, that must be borne by the zamindar himself. Now, if the traditional zamindar failed to pay the fixed amount every year, this is a permanent land revenue settlement between government and the zamindar. If the zamindar is failed to pay that fixed amount every year, then his land will be seized by the company and it will be put on auction, and that land will be given to the highest bidder in the auction. So, there is a case like loss of your traditional estates. If you are unable to pay that fixed amount on a very prescribed date, then you will lose your land, because the government will seize your land, it will put on auction and it will be given to some other people or some other people who pay the highest amount for that land. Okay. So, that is, these are the features, you have an idea about this, and some merits of permanent settlement. The merits of permanent settlement, first thing is there is expansion of cultivation. Since these Rajas and Talukdars are made the owners of the land or owners of the estates, they brought more land under cultivation. They forced farmers to produce more and more pasture wastelands brought under cultivation. Expansion of cultivation ultimately contributed surplus in the production. Surplus in the production contributed growth in trade and commerce, because these talukdars or rajas or zamindars who got the surplus income, they invested that surplus income in trade and commerce and also in the expansion of infrastructure or in the development of infrastructure also to some extent. So, that is one of the plus point or one of the merit of this Permanent Settlement Act. Then see, more income it brought and these zamindars became loyal class. Under this system, since this is an agreement between the government and the zamindar was made a loyal class to British. Let us check the case of 1857 revolt. 1857 revolt, most of the zamindars, most of the rajas and these highly influential people in the society who became a loyal class of British, and they supported British colonial administration even during the crisis situations. So, during 1857 revolt, none of these zamindars supported the cause of this freedom struggle or this course of 1857 revolt. None of them supported these mutineers or the soldiers of 1857 revolt. In fact, they extended their support to British force to suppress this 1857 revolt. So, through these revenue contract, land revenue contract between government and the zamindars, these company or these colonial government was able to create a loyal class which supported the colonial rule in India. Then another feature is stable income for the government. Since this was a permanent settlement, the government was relieved from all such extra responsibilities of collecting revenue directly from the farmers. Now, the collection of revenue is the responsibility of the zamindar, and every year zamindars pay a fixed amount to the central treasury. That means it ultimately provided for stable fixed income to central government. Then there is reduction of expenditure. Now, all such activities related to land revenue collection, that goes to zamindar, and this is the responsibility of the zamindar to collect revenue. That is why the company was relieved from appointing more revenue collecting agents, and it reduced that revenue expenditure of the company. Now, there are no such requirements for appointment of the revenue collectors or revenue agents. Now, the sole responsibility goes to zamindar. They will collect the revenue and will pay to the government. Now, their revenue expenditure, it again cut down. Now, some demerits of the permanent settlement. This permanent settlement or this particular zamindari settlement, which was disadvantages for the farmers of Bengal, Bihar, Orissa. For example, and for the company itself, it was disadvantageous at a certain point of view. For example, the company was a loser in long term. In long term, company was a loser because after every year it witnessed there was a surplus in the production. Maybe more land brought under cultivation, maybe it is because of better fertility of the soil, or maybe better using the better fertilizers or hybrid seeds, maybe it is because of the advancement of the new science, technology or equipments, etc. The cultivation or maybe production in the land, it increased like anything. There was increase in the production and it ultimately contributed to surplus income from cultivation. But now the government cannot claim any share of the surplus, because this contract was like a fixed amount will be paid to government every year. In case of surplus, government cannot claim the share of the surplus, and their surplus go to the zamindar. So, in a longer term, the company was the loser because it cannot claim any increase in the produce. Second thing is, the farmers were left at the mercy of the zamindars. The farmers initially they were owners of the land, but now they became tenants at will. They are landless class, they have no right over the land they cultivate, and also they were left to the mercy of the zamindar. So, the farmers they suffered the most, they have no ownership rights and the zamindars exploited them like anything. Then the absentee landlordism. Most of the zamindari class, these rich classes, they migrated to urban areas where they get better urban amenities, and it created an absentee landlordism in the rural areas. They appointed the revenue collectors, and revenue collectors they simply exploited these farming classes or the farmers like anything. Again, jotedars. Traditional zamindars, when they had some compassionate feelings or compassionate values also, they were compassionate toward these farmers. So, traditional zamindars, they couldn't manage these time bound revenue collections. They failed to collect the revenue on time or in time and pay the revenue to the company in time. Due to their failure, they lost their land. When they lost their land, there were some new class people and they came and they bought this land for higher prices. The land was put on auction and these people bought this land for higher prices. They were called jotedars and they were another class of zamindari, and these jotedars, they started exploiting farmers in multiple manners. Okay. So, these are some disadvantages of this Permanent Settlement Act. Of course, there is another land revenue system which was called Riotuari settlement. Permanent was a failure. Permanent settlement was a failure which was introduced in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa by Lord Cornwallis with the assistance of Sir John Shore. It turned a failure. It turned a huge loss for the company in a long term. Then after that, in 1820, they introduced another system. They introduced, it was in 17, this permanent settlement was introduced in the late stages of this 18th century, and here in the early 19th century, this Riotuari settlement was introduced in Madras Presidency. Riotuari settlement was introduced by Thomas Munro, and Riotuari settlement, why this Riotuari settlement was introduced in Madras Presidency? Riotuari settlement, it is another kind of land revenue settlement which is signed between the company and the farmers directly. There are no intermediaries, there are no zamindari clause. This is a land revenue contract signed between the company, government and the farmers. Now, reasons for this implementation of Riotuari settlement in Madras Presidency, one thing is absence of zamindari clause. Zamindars were totally absent here. Zamindar class, zamindari class was, it was usual or it was common in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, etc. But here the zamindari system is mostly absent here, and also government wanted a periodic revision or renewal of this particular land revenue. Government wanted a periodic revision of this land revenue. Under permanent settlement, it was one of the biggest disadvantage for the company. Company has no right for periodic renewal of the land revenue. But here they wanted every year, or they wanted at a regular interval, they wanted a renewal of the land revenue. They can enhance the land revenue at their own will. Then there is cultivators. There is another notion, that is another view which you support this Riotuari settlement. Here the company wanted the protection of the cultivators, the protection of the farmers. Under permanent settlement, since it was a contract between government and the zamindars, government has no direct contact with these farmers, and the farmers were left at this mercy of the zamindars. Zamindars exploited the farmers like anything. So, under Riotuari system, this government claimed that since this is an agreement signed between, or it is a contract, land revenue contract between the company and the farmers, they can equally take care of these welfare of the farmers or welfare of these cultivators. These were the various claims under which this Riotuari settlement was established, or it was introduced in Madras Presidency. Later it introduced in Bombay Presidency also. So, under these, the basic features of Riotuari, it was a land revenue contract between the government and the Riot. Riot means farmer, and here the government fixed a huge tax on farmers. Every year the farmers, they are owners of the land and they are supposed to pay a huge amount as land revenue tax. They have to pay this huge amount as land revenue tax to the company. Then the government has the right to enhance that land revenue ratio. Government always has the right, the government under this Riotuari system, government has the right to enhance or increase that land revenue ratio every year or at regular intervals. Now, again, rigid pattern of collection. It is almost similar to permanent settlement. Under permanent settlement also we have seen that yes, this manner of collection or the way in which the government collected the revenue, it was rigid, and anybody failed to pay the amount in time, they were losers, or their land was seized and put on auction. So, here also they followed a rigid method of collection, and here under this Riotuari settlement, there is nothing like differences between Riotuari and this permanent settlement at the end of the just to see that under Riotuari system, what happened is, under Riotuari system, like a single zamindar replaced these multiple zamindars. In permanent settlement, many zamindars are there. Now, under Riotuari system, a single zamindar is there, that is the company government, or this British government is the single zamindar, and this single zamindar is exploiting these poor farmers. So, basically there are no such differences, or nothing is favorable for these farmers, either permanent settlement of 1793 or this Riotuari settlement of 1820. Actually, it simply crushed the backbone of this village self-sufficient economy, or it crushed that backbone of this poor peasantry class of Indian society. It was highly exploitative, permanent and Riotuari highly exploitative, and no welfare measures for the peasantry was either taken care of. And one more system is there, which is called Mahalwari settlement. Mahalwari settlement was introduced in northwestern provinces, some portions of Punjab, some portions of central India, and also this upper Gangetic valley. Under this Mahalwari system, these revenue bearing villages, they were divided into different mahals. Mahals means different revenue bearing villages only, and these revenue villages were given under the ownership of these entire villages. I mean, the villages were the owners of the land. A joint ownership concept is introduced under Mahalwari system. Multiple revenue villages are there, and the collection of revenue from the village and the payment of the revenue from the villages, that is the joint responsibility of the entire villages. Village heads will be there, village councils will be there, and it is their joint responsibility that they should collect the revenue and pay to the government. This is Mahalwari system. But again, this system is a failure, because here also they charged, or here also they imposed heavy taxes, excessive arbitrary taxes they imposed upon the peasantry. That is why the people were unable to pay on time. Due to their failure, their land was seized, or they were evicted from their land. Okay. Anyway, permanent settlement, or it is Riotuari settlement, or it is Mahalwari settlement, all these land revenue policies were highly exploitative, and it is simply benefited either the zamindar or the company, but for the farmers, poor Indian peasantry, nothing beneficial. None of these land revenue settlement was beneficial for Indian poor peasantry. They were supposed to pay higher taxes. In case of their inability to pay, their failure of payment, their lands will be seized, their properties will be seized, and they will be evicted from the land. So, all these are discriminatory policies, land revenue policies, by which British created a huge income, or the British colonial government, it created a huge income, and they invested this income in purchasing Indian raw materials and sending them to England and in English factories. After industrial revolution in England, there were numerous manufacturing factories, units mushroomed in England, and there made the finished products. Finished products again returned to India. Indians were compelled to buy these finished British products. So, it was just a part of the so called exploitative colonial economic policy.